Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Jasmine Lee. Reuters reports that the Trump administration plans to scrap the AI diffusion rule. Introduced under President Biden and set to take effect in mid-May, the rule aimed to block China from acquiring advanced AI chips through third countries. It also classifies nations into 3 tiers for chip export controls. The U.S. Commerce Department said the AI diffusion rule is too complex to implement. The Trump administration is now working on a simpler set of regulation, a move that had caught the market's attention. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to visit the Middle East soon, and he said that easing restrictions on AI chip purchases by countries like Saudi Arabia will be announced soon. How should we interpret this signal suggesting a potential loosening of U.S. export controls? Join us today are Mi-Yong Kim, former U.S. Department of Commerce Bureau of Industry and Security Officer, currently also serves as the visiting scholar at DSET. Our second guest is Marco Masker, Newmondo Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The AI diffusion rule was finalized in final week of former President Biden's team and was set to take effect on May 15th. According to Bloomberg, U.S. officials plan to replace it with a simpler system that would establish a global export licensing framework through direct agreements with individual governments. Until the new rules are ready, existing chip export control will remain in place. So, Mi-Yong, allow me to call you as Mi-Yong. Yes. You served for many years as a senior official at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So when the Trump administration is suggesting that the AI diffusion rule is too difficult to enforce, what does it exactly mean?
Thank you, Jasmine. I completely agree that the current AI diffusion rule is very difficult to implement, but also to comply with by companies, and that's a very important aspect of any rule. So the Trump administration sent what's called a rule to rescind the AI diffusion rule to the OMB on the 7th of this month. So I expect the rule to rescind the AI diffusion rule will be published before the 15th, which is the current effective date. So it is up to the companies, not just the U.S. companies, but the recipient companies to keep track of the quantity limit. So there's a worldwide limitation on exactly how many the chips that can be exported, which is very, very unwieldy. But it's not just the companies that are subject to the quantity limitations.
Yes.
There are what's called a Tier 1 destinations, and Taiwan is included in the Tier 1. There are also certain reporting and certification requirements for those destinations as well. So no one is really off the hook. It's just that for what's called the rest of the world, there's a quantity limitation. With regard to President Trump's trip to the Middle East,
yes.
There are a lot of data centers currently in the Middle East, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Those are 3 countries that President Trump will be visiting.
Yes.
And AI centers are huge consumers of AI chips.
Yes.
So those 3 countries are in the group called Rest of the World, and they are subject to quantity limitations. What the Trump administration will come up with in the end to replace the AI diffusion rule is very unclear. There'll be some talk about country-by-country negotiations. I think that doing it that way, I think it's going to be equally unwieldy and complex, but just in a different way. So right now, there's not a whole lot of concrete reporting coming out of the government, and that's perfectly fine. So until we see something, I think that we're just not going to know whether or not it's going to be simple, or it's just as complex, but different.
So we're not necessarily going to see a more relaxed policy, not necessarily.
I do not think that there will be relaxation of advanced chip exports to China.
Only to China?
Well, right now, the strictest prohibition is to China, as well as what's called arms embargo destinations, countries that are friendly to China, or destinations where U.S. has very strict export controls. But advanced chips, target really is China, for all intents and purposes. There could be some relaxation, that is certain allies and partners in the Middle East, moving them into what's called the Tier 1, the group that Taiwan belongs to.
Like Taiwan is,
So the results of these visits will be highly, highly unlikely that will result in any relaxation of chip rules to China.
And Marco, the potential replacement of the AI diffusion rule has driven chip stocks higher. So could you help us to understand how does the market interpret this development?
Yeah, I think if you are talking about these high-end chips, these are mainly the NVIDIA chips, right? So they are used in the data centers.
Yes.
I think we need to understand that at the moment the biggest consumer of this are also like in the US, the companies like Microsoft, Meta, Google. They are the ones who are basically sucking up all the production. So let's be honest, TSMC has seen 16 quarters, a year-over-year monthly increase in the revenue because of this. So this means like, I think at the moment they still are not able to produce enough products that the market basically can take. So some of the restriction, what was mentioned by Mi-Yong, is basically also not only blocking certain countries to get access to, but also looking who is getting first the product, the distribution, right? So it's similar also in the memory market when you use the high bandwidth memory technology. So this is normally incorporated in this chip. There's also like a limited supply or suppliers who are doing this. So I think that's why I believe this, if you look at the stock market, they always think, oh, this is just a hype. AI is basically, will lose its power. But I think in reality, AI is something which is reshaping the world. And I understand that for the USA, they want to get some tighter controls of this.
As a leader.
But it's quite challenging, right? So as you mentioned, right? If we're looking, for example, at the NVIDIA report, I think the second largest invoice address is Singapore. Because some of the corporations are also sitting there, but it's also close to Malaysia. And now USA also try to apply some restrictions also in these countries, like with tariffs. So it's definitely not an easy mission from a business perspective. I think the stock market, of course, you know, they are playing with anything what has happened on the politics or on the tariff side. But I think on the demand side, I definitely don't see that this is just like a temporarily hype, because otherwise the USA also would not go all in and try to control more of this.
Yeah, the demand is still very strong. And to follow on that, if the original AI diffusion rule will remain in place, what do you think that will have an impact on Taiwan's semiconductor industry?
Well, I think from my understanding, even with the current one, NVIDIA was able to make chips which are not meeting this criteria, right? Some is with bandwidth, some is like with cores, with computing power they can do. But also there we have learned, probably in the last couple of months, that if we look, for example, in China, like a DeepSeek, you know, how they have been able to accelerate, even with some chips which they had before. So we always need to think about when we put these kind of solutions in place or these tariffs, restrictions, there are many ways to roam, right? So this means like if you have like a superpower chip, I think the most expensive NVIDIA chip is $50,000–$60,000 US. But if you think later, at the moment we are the first wave of AI, data center. But then think about AI chips on edge AI, like, you know, where you have like smaller units and you put them together. So I think then it will be more common in the market. And of course, you know, this AI is when, once the models are there, you can do all the queries, you can get all the information out, and you can utilize this to be more advanced in your technology. And that's what is happening. So I think China is much closer on AI than they are on chip development.
I see.
Yeah, that's a very important point, hardware to software.
And we will talk about Huawei later as well. And let's bring back to the topic, to the AI diffusion rule. And before the announcement, so the announcement to replace the AI diffusion rule came just before Trump. He mentioned that his visit to Middle East. And before that, on May 1st, reports indicated that U.S. is considering easing restrictions on the NVIDIA's chip sales to the UAE. UAE, Trump also stated on May 3rd that looser control on AI chip exports to countries like Saudi Arabia will be announced soon. So before Trump's return to the office, there was some concern in Washington, D.C. that advanced AI chip could be rerouted to China. So, Mi-Yong, could you help us to understand if we are going to have a more relaxed policy or have a policy change, how can the U.S. prevent AI chips from flowing into China?
Yes, so we had the exact same issue when the advanced chip rule was originally issued back in 2022, and then there was a second set of rules that was issued a year later, and initially the target was China in the 2022 rule. In 2023, the scope expanded to include China as well as what I referred to earlier as arms embargo destinations, certain countries that U.S. has issues with. However, the group did not include a lot of Southeast Asian countries. And it was during that one-year interim period where U.S. government learned that there were other companies being set up by China to acquire these advanced chips. It didn't get to the issue, however. Making determinations on where to put a country is not just about export controls. It has to do with a geopolitical, economic relationship as well. So it's a huge decision for the government. As you probably know, China also has data centers in the Middle East. So I think that there will be if not similar, if not the exact same issues with transshipment issues. I hope that the U.S. government, and I think they have, learned how to fill those gaps and apply those lessons learned if there's going to be any relaxation of rules related to chips going to the Middle East. But we'll have to see. The pronouncements that are made by policymakers, things that are coming out of the White House, they don't necessarily translate exactly into regulatory language. In export controls, it's about regulations. So unless it gets actually put in on paper and officially published, it's not a rule. It's just,
It's just a rhetoric.
Just words.
So Marco, Mi-Yong mentioned about Southeast Asia countries, and we know that Malaysia and Thailand have also been among the hubs that has been diverting chips to China. And according to Bloomberg, they said the chip export control rules that the Trump administration right now is currently drafting aim to strengthen oversight of global chip flows. So what impact could the new rule have on the TSMC and other major players in the global supply chain?
I think, first of all, a couple of years ago with the first Trump administration, we have already seen that people moving out of China. And then basically they were going Vietnam, Thailand, others. I mean, Samsung has a very big facility I think in Vietnam, where they're also producing. And so with all these policies, what is very challenging is the companies want to, let's say, de-risk, because decouple is a very strong word for me, in terms of business for semiconductor. But de-risking totally makes sense also on a global supply chain level. Don't be in an area not only for politics, but where earthquakes are, typhoon, whatever. So you need to split a little bit around. But then after 2-3 years, policy changed. Then again, with tariffs and others. So it's quite challenging for businesses because it's a quite complex industry, right? So we talk about a lot of capex when you talk about semiconductor. And when we talk, for example, for Malaysia, Malaysia is a big hub for testing chips. Not so for advanced. Exactly. So they basically go there, they package. Also Philippines, for example, is another area where this is going. So I think for a lot of these companies, when I also speak with them, sometimes they're like, oh, what we do next? What other options do you have, right? Where can you go? And so that's probably the challenge when you say, you talked about the politics, you talk about then the regulations, but the regulations are then basically when they hit the businesses, right? So once they are in place, then you have to adapt to it. You either have to pay the tariffs or you cannot export. So there's many implications. And I think this was the last couple of years for the semiconductor industry, extremely challenging.
Yeah.
So I think when we talk about AI, so I get the point completely there. And I think what we also should not forget, a lot of the Taiwan ecosystem for the semiconductor, because of TSMC, was also helping worldwide semiconductor, right? So mask sets, you know, a lot of the pre-products, yeah, you have a lot of steps, the cooperation with Japan, you have TSMC in Europe coming up.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of global cooperation, and I think the people just want to understand, okay, how can I have somewhere like a safe corridor to run my business? Because even in Taiwan, I think there's still a big dependency on China, where Taiwanese companies sell there, especially mask sets and others.
Yeah.
Taiwan is the best because they have good high volume customers where TSMC, UMC show them how that it works, right? So I think in this regards, coming to your question, is really challenging. I think these countries will comply. They will also negotiate.
Definitely,
but I think there will be some limitations that you cannot completely control everything. I think that's my personal opinion if you look into this. But if you can control 80 to 90% and you give a direction, and I think this is the intention from the US. They want to put a direction that not everybody is producing in China. So they want to diversify. I just have, from a business perspective, a little challenges if I look into technologies like battery technology, not AI, right? Battery technology, where we are pretty much depending on China for renewable energy, right? So I think there needs to be somehow a consensus. I think people have to find some common ground that you still find a way to work together. And even if it means AI hardware with lower performance, this is basically what they can get. It's okay, but I think the whole escalation is not good for the US, is not good for China, but it's also not good for the rest of the world. Because supply chain constraints during COVID has showed what impact this has on the industry.
And Mi-Yong, my question here is that if we look at the bigger picture here, how has the direction of the U.S. chip control, export control changed from President Trump's his first term to Biden administration, and then now to the second term of Mr. Trump?
So under Trump 1, there was not a whole policy shift related to China per se. There were some discussions about how to manage export controls related to China. What Trump administration did was to put Huawei and SMIC on the entity list, which is, you know, very restrictive trade policy. But you know, it was company specific, and just because somebody's on the entity list does not mean that export is prohibited to that entity. It really depends on exactly what the product is, what the item is, and how it's going to be used. So it is possible to actually export to Huawei and SMIC. It just really depends on what you're exporting and how it's going to be used. The monumental shift on chip exports to China came under Biden. Because Biden administration is the one that put forth all these regulatory schemes for advanced chips. The indication is that Trump administration will continue down the same track. It might refine some things like it is trying to do with the diffusion rule, but the trajectory is not going to change. It has been set. And Biden administration has put in really pretty serious guardrails around exports of advanced chips, particularly for AI end use. I know a lot of statements are coming out of the White House, but how that will play into set policy that what they can translate into regulations is very uncertain at this point.
And now let's turn to China's chip development. NVIDIA CEO and Jensen Huang recently told CNBC that China's AI market could reach to $50 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. He also said that it would be a huge loss. if U.S. companies are unable to access that market. Meanwhile, Financial Times report that the Chinese tech giant Huawei is building new factories in Shenzhen as it attempts for the first time to produce its own high-end semi-nanometer chips. So, Marco, what's your take on China's ability to produce its own high-end chips and their capability in chip technology?
Mm-hmm. First of all, we need to understand that these high-end chips, what TSMC producing, like 2 nanometers, 3 nanometers, and now they call it like the angstrom area.
Yes.
So these are made on ASML machines exclusively. Mm-hmm. So this is EUV and high-NA EUV.
Yes.
Both categories of equipment are not able to be shipped to China. Already, this was, I think, during the Biden administration, this was done already. So they don't have access. They have access to so-called DUV machines. So also from ASML, but there are also Japanese companies who also provide these kind of machines. And there is, for real, the opportunity that you can build on these machines, also below 10 nanometer. You can probably also do 7 nanometer. The big question in our industry is, how is your yield? How is your yield rate? So this means you make one wafer, there are, let's say, 500 chips, and let's say, I say extremely, 50 are working and 450 not. Yes, you can make the chip, but you know the cost for this is quite high. And this is something what we really don't know. I think I'm quite convinced that China can produce this chip with 7 nanometer. They have also very smart people who are able to do this. There are tricks how you can make it.
But if they can mass produce it.
Yeah, they probably mass produce, probably also, but then the question is, how is your output? This is what we really don't know. And I think one thing what we also have to remember, there are many ways, and I think if one road is blocked, then, you know, for me, it's always like, I'm married to a Chinese, right? So it's always like water, you know, like you have a rule and then you basically go around, right? And so this kind of philosophy, what these people have, they are forced to do this, this open maybe up new opportunities. Do I think they can do EUV? Not really so quickly, because this is a combination you need to think about. ASML is so successful because they work together with one of the best laser companies in the world and with one of the best optics company in the world. They didn't design this by themselves. So the whole ASML machine is a combination of market leaders around the world, including also US technology, which is in there. And this is quite challenging. Yeah, so I think in this regards, seeing below 7 nanometer in high volume, challenging. You remember last year when TSMC, basically the US government found out that they supplied a chip, but apparently TSMC did not know. There was a shell company in between and they were shipping and everybody in the industry was like, wow, they can do 5 nano. Even for me, it was like, oh, really? They can do 5 nano? And then in October it came out, it was like, oh, actually, it was kind of a chiplet, and they had like one tile, which basically was used on that. And so chiplet is another category, probably also in the policies from the US, if you look there, where you have like several independent chips, and you bring them together. And the chiplet technology, to put this together, is also complex, but is more achievable than, for example, making a 2 nanometer chip. Yeah? So this is also something what needs to be considered, or where you need to look, how could China, for example, accelerate in regards to making chiplets who have also high power, but different individual chips who achieve this.
So we're talking about this advanced AI chips. According to a new DSET report, it is suggesting that China is also strategically dominating the foundational chip manufacturing. And so my question would be, in face of this China's growing capabilities and strategy in chip manufacturing, how can Taiwan better work with our like-minded allies to safeguard our supply chain resilience and maintain our technological leadership? Mi-Yong?
Yes, so, you know, US is not the market leader in legacy chips, but US is very concerned about legacy chips being dumped in the U.S. market or any other market for that matter. There are a couple of things the U.S. government is doing right now, and one is the what's called the 301 unfair trade practices investigation led by USTR.
Yes.
Actually, that started under Biden administration and Trump administration continuing on. Trump administration recently, just a few weeks ago, started what's called a 232 investigation. They're looking at imports for national security of several items, including semiconductor and electronic components that has semiconductors embedded in them. So on the there's a current effort by the U.S. government.
Yes.
There are a couple of things that U.S. government can still do, and one is something called like reverse entity list. So having a list of producers in China where U.S. would not source from. And even though the entity list is a part of U.S. regulatory scheme,
Yes.
a lot of countries pay attention to it.
Yes.
And in fact, a lot of countries make their business decisions based on whether or not somebody's on the entity list. So
Yes.
this is a very powerful tool. Another thing that U.S. I think has done already, and Taiwan and other countries hopefully will follow, is basically not incorporating items that have Chinese legacy chips. I mean, it has, especially in the critical infrastructure,
Yes.
like in the defense industry, homeland security.
Yes.
I think those types of items have inherently higher risk to homeland security, and it will be good for countries and companies to look to see whether or not they want to take on such risk, and maybe reducing acquiring such components from China. So I think those are a couple of things that U.S. and as well as Taiwan and hopefully other countries take example from that and follow the lead.
Thank you both of you for great insights. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.